Welcome back to Bitcoin Study Sessions. I'm joined by my co-host, Grant Reichert, and my name is Lucas Maddie. We are celebrating Christmas, enjoying all the great things that the world has to offer us, friends and family, and a chance to return to the farm and enjoy some cold weather and quiet and be able to see the stars. And we're also discussing the digital apocalypse. We're diving into
Yeah.
a book called Human Forever, The Digital Politics of Spiritual War. And this book is written by James Poulos. He is a, a fascinating thinker, a bit of a visionary, I think, is a good way to put this, just in terms of the vision that he is laying out for us. James wrote this book and, interestingly enough, published it on Bitcoin through Canonic.xyz, which we'll bring up here in a bit. James is a political philosopher, PhD from Georgetown. He hosts a show called Zero Hour on Blaze Media, and he's actually a wonderful listen. If you get a chance to listen to him on podcasts, which he does a number of them, he's a very eloquent speaker. As with many of these authors, he's very careful with his choice of words and uses dictionary of words as an armament to solidify his position, and does it well in a way that it's easy to understand. I listened to a couple of his podcasts with a friend that has no idea about what Bitcoin is, or this idea of kind of the digital world somewhat taking over through the algorithms, and being unaware of that. And my friend thought that it was wonderful to listen to. So James Poulos, Human Forever. And as always, to kick us off, Grant is going to give us a bit of a summary, and we're going to have some discussion as we go throughout. So thank you for joining.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully, it's not going to be a huge summary that I'm going to do here. We're really going to hash this out in conversation. This is an excellent book. It has a sort of like interlocking set of vocabulary or memes. And you'll see a lot of the memes or vocabulary that constitute this book kind of floating through X. You'll see there's a shared vocabulary between Polis and some other Twitter accounts talking about catechizing the bots, talking about terraforming humanity, talking about Bitcoin monasteries, the cyborg theocracy. These are all memes that have kind of entered into the discourse. This book helps excavate some of those for me. I've always wondered what some of these phrases that are really suggestive mean. And James didn't coin all of those, but he discusses all of those. And hopefully we're going to unpack some of those things. If you kind of ever stumbled upon through Bitcoin Twitter some esoteric discussion of a digital apocalypse, then this hopefully will bring some of that home. It's kind of like the broadest, even just like content, like flavor-based introduction. I was trying to just weave it together in my mind, kind of what this whole endeavor is, human forever, how to stay human forever in light of the digital apocalypse that we live in the wake of. I mean, the idea is generally the apocalypse has already occurred in 2007 with the release of the iPhone. We are living in year zero after the catastrophe. Our memories have been wiped. We no longer have human memory, only machinic data that stores all of our movements, interests, likes, everything about us. Our imagination operates freely, wheels in space, spins, wishes from ether, is untethered to anything, but it's a wish-making capacity rather than a creative one. We seek instant perfection away from our flawed human body, kind of a transhumanist, post-humanist escape from the human sort of endeavor, even as a digital swarm of algorithm and bots kind of reconstitutes all of reality and tells us that that's possible. These bots and algorithms envelop and penetrate, and they overwhelm us in a sort of sensory overload that prevents any sort of maturation, any sort of development, because it promises to deliver infinity in a moment. That's kind of not even a summary, just kind of like a flavor of the world that we're going to enter into here with Human Forever. As the broadest introduction, start with the phrase that's not even something Polis came up with himself. Cyborg Theocracy. This is a phrase from Ardi and Tola, who is the founder of Canonic.xyz, where this book is published. So the cyborg theocracy, a cyborg. What's a cyborg? It's just a man-machine hybrid, any sort of, you would say RoboCop is an obvious cyborg, right? But less obvious, a human with a cell phone, with a smartphone is a cyborg
Yeah.
because they've melded with that in a very serious sort of way. It's an extension of their memory, of their capacities, of who they are. So that's a cyborg. What is a cyborg theocracy then? Theocracy is a sort of like mode of governance or way of ruling a society. Theos, like related to God. Theocracy, rule by gods. But it's not rule by God. And this is something I got from Joe Allen, another author who is published on canonic.xyz. As I said, this discourse is woven together by many individuals. The cyborg theocracy. The theocracy is not ruled by gods, but it's ruled by technology as God, and more so by a priestly class that promises it can communicate to that technology for us. It communicates with the bots, communicates with the algorithm, whether it's the engineers that have kind of privileged access to the technology, or whether it's the ethicists who tell us how that technology must be used. These are people who are all kind of jockeying or competing to be the priestly class in our new cyborg theocracy. So if we sort of have a theocratic government where that government or that where the god in that theocratic framework is technology, we have a priestly class that people are fighting to be the members of, engineers, ethicists, and we, the citizens being ruled, are all humble cyborgs on some sort of transitionary, some people are escaping it as much as they can, living in the woods. Other people are melding more and more Brian Johnson style, just going full bore into it, making themselves as less human and more post-human as possible to escape from all of the dirty realities of being human, like dying, things like that. So that's kind of, broadly speaking, what this book is going to react against, is this notion of the cyborg theocracy, which I think, as these authors talk about it, is really just a description of the world we are in, using colorful but also suggestive language to get us to understand the real import of what is happening, that there is an underlying religiosity or an explicit overt religiosity to what people are doing with technology and technology's relationship to us, that if you don't look at it through the lens either explicitly of religion or at least as a way that humans express their religiosity, you're not going to fully understand what's happening. So I said that we're already living in this cyborg theocracy. A key part of this book, Human Forever, is also to get us to understand we're also living after the apocalypse. James does a lot of really good work tracing etymologies here, which is kind of the roots of words. And when you do that, you kind of understand a bit more about what the reality we inhabit, which is, of course, pieced together through the words we use. We're living after the apocalypse. Apocalypse is a sort of revealing. It reveals something. The digital apocalypse, something has been revealed. In 2007, we had the release of the smartphone. That's the beginning of this digital catastrophe, digital apocalypse that we're all living in the wake of. And you can see, again, the beginning of a widespread cyborg style of living for even the man and woman in the street. We're now, we can use our imagination to summon instantly a sensory overload through TikTok, through live streams, through whatever sort of thing you want to do with whatever sort of app to satisfy whatever sort of wish you have that's really unmoored from anything except for your pure ability to wish as such. And this digital catastrophe, living in the wake of this, is causing a despair. It's causing a feeling that we no longer have sufficient answers to give to our offspring about why they should bother carrying out their lives. Because in the past, we gave fully human responses to that question, right? You would tell a human to live out a human life. You are going to want to pair up with a person to pair bond with. You're going to want to have children. You're going to want to be in community to help protect and raise those children. You're going to want to develop your skills to participate in that community. We could give all of these human answers to the question of how do you live? But now, after 2007, the answers to these questions are changing. People are wondering, what does it mean to live when we are cyborgs, when things have changed? He mentions in China, there's something called the Tang Ping movement, which is expressed as kind of lying flat, doing nothing. People who are not marrying, not buying houses, not having children. The response to living in the wake of digital catastrophe is to cease living, essentially. Some people are grasping at intensity through things like DMT trips or whatever computer analog to that, whatever virtual analog, embracing insanity to try to escape into fantasy from responsibility, what remains of it, of being human and what that entails. So that's the cyborg theocracy and the digital catastrophe. Does that make sense, Lucas? This is kind of a framework for where we're beginning here.
Yeah, the cyborg theocracy reminds me of Jason Lowery's software when he introduces the God Kings. Here's Vitalik, and here's Elon, and here's Jeff
Yes.
Bezos, and these are these are the keepers of the flame, I suppose, with regard to the technology.
They're almost the
And
lighters of the new flame, a sort of Promethean fire, right?
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
a new
yeah,
thing.
yeah. But these are like the technology that our lives are intrinsically tied to now have very few people that have administrator control. And those people that have administrator control are effectively gods because they can do things like deplatform. They can, erase your digital existence, or they can platform. They can amplify your digital existence. You see, it's it's better odds to try and get Elon to retweet you than it is to win the lottery, and the net effect is probably about the same. Because when that happens, it elevates a person to a status that is beyond what they ever imagined. Tiffany
It's
Fong
Zeus coming down
is the
from the
one,
mount.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
just
an
blessing,
anointing a
yeah.
human. Yeah, it is. That's an interesting way to look at it. A retweet from one of the tech theocrats. I don't know what you would call them, but those people explicitly embracing almost explicitly, halfway pseudo, their role as a new priestly class to commune with the gods for us and conveying the blessing of the gods upon us.
Yeah. And the digital catastrophe is just so apparent. If you can disconnect and then you can look around. And I noticed this, I used to ride a motorcycle a lot, and I quit riding a motorcycle mainly because when you ride a motorcycle, you're not on your cell phone. You obviously have to pay attention to the world around you, and everything is a threat. And I would just go tool around town, and I realized that they teach you when you go get your license that you should try to make eye contact with the drivers that are approaching you, because that way they know you're there, right?
Yeah,
And you can't make. I mean, it is
yeah,
utterly terrifying. Just on an average Tuesday afternoon or a Friday morning or just whenever, um, I would say 80% of the people that you meet are head down on a cell phone. And so they're not really there. And what we know about the brain is that it's effectively like a computer, and it's got um, a certain amount of bandwidth. And that bandwidth, when you start splitting it between the thing that you're holding in your hand and whatever else is going on, like I describe people that have a cell phone addiction as, they are disabled. They're one-handed people. They do everything in life with one hand, because they always have this other hand on their phone. And
yeah,
so it's made us physically limited. Um, it's made us motivationally limited, right? Because you don't need to get up and go somewhere. You can just press a button, and it'll come to you, whether it's your food or your clothes or your
yep,
supplies or a guitar or a relationship, or what passes for a relationship now, or even skip that and go straight to the extrapolation of, or the extraction of whatever intimacy in the form of pornography. And to see this, I see this in my, I won't name it, but there's a family member I have that, just spends 9 hours a day on a phone. And by the way, that's only something that I note as odd because it's a grown adult. When you get into
Yeah.
the 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16 and below, it's actually, that's the norm right now. I think the United States average right now for under 16 or under 15 or something like that is 9 hours a day of screen time. And so
Yeah.
you're awake for 16.
Yeah.
You're on a screen more than you're sleeping. You're on a screen more than you are awake, in terms of other things. But then you've also got that attention residue of this, I'm looking at my phone on TikTok and then I put it down. Well, I'm not out of that. Like that, whatever I was looking at, it's still commanding my attention for
Yeah. For
probably
sure.
somewhere around the next 20 minutes, this attention residue from context switching, that pervades society. We just had our family Christmas. You had your family Christmas. And
Mhm.
I have an uncle that is an incredible storyteller, and he was able to make it through one very short story, and he finally looked around and realized that no one made it with him. Like, people started, and then there's
Yeah.
19 people there, and everyone had
Yeah.
already switched to their cell phone, because the second that there's a pause for effect,
Yeah.
the second that there is the space between the notes that makes the music, people
Yes.
people switch, and they go back. So this digi- and this
That
and i- this digital catastrophe,
yeah.
you and I spend a lot of time together, and how I've like been so active to try and do that, because I find it pervading me and
For
destroying
sure.
my ability
Yeah.
to write songs, destroying my ability to feel, to be connected emotionally to the world around me. Um, yeah, this what was the Chinese word for the
Tang
just quitting?
ping, and I don't know
Tang
if yeah, I
ping.
don't know, of
Yeah,
course, the, phonetics on that, if it's up, down, they always have the intonation marks,
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's tang ping is the movement, and it's based on, I think it might be a work of fiction, but it's turned into a manifesto, I forget, but it's a sort of, um, a movement, yeah, and you can see it maybe I can't speak for Chinese culture, but having heard other people discuss it, they're sort of, even more vulnerable because they went through the Cultural Revolution that really stripped away a lot of the traditions they had and were
Mhm.
left open. But of course, we can't, in the United States, we're vulnerable as well, obviously. From what you're saying, this anecdote rings true to everybody listening, I imagine.
I
But
do think that's a really valid point, though. Like, if you look at Eastern cultures, they have a stronger culture, right? Because they don't have this break of heterogeneous ethnicities and races coming in with their own cultures. If you're Chinese, you're Chinese. Like, there's no, there's no,
yeah,
Irish Chinese. There's no
yeah,
Latvian Chinese. But if you're American, then in the block that you live, there's probably 30 different trace cultures that they have their own
yes,
little unique thing. And so that melding, what happens with that melting pot is that everything melts. And so if everything melts, then it all goes into one flavor.
yeah.
When you're a little kid, you go to the fountain at the convenience store, and you get a soda, and you do the suicide, right? Or you put in like a
Oh,
little
right.
bit
Forgot
of
about
every
that.
single
Yeah,
one.
that's
Yeah.
right.
And
Yeah,
and turns out, by the way, like, Coke tastes pretty good, Pepsi tastes pretty good, Sprite tastes pretty good, and then you mix them all together, and they taste like shit.
yeah.
So yeah, you lose
That
that culture when you mix everything.
Yes, and that is a part you mentioned 2 things that are gonna take us forward in this book. The space between the music, that's gonna be an important part of what James discusses. He has this notion of the implicit and the explicit, and that our culture and our society since the 1700s really has undergone a process of increasing disenchantment, which is a removal of hidden or implicit spaces and things as we make reality more described in an explicit fashion, with scientific theories that fully describe the operation of nature, with books that fully detail the commitments of theology and politics. Things become less implicit. There's less spaces between the notes that make the music, and more an attempt to totally understand and grasp reality through reason and science. That's a thing that we're losing, the implicit spaces. But and this notion of heterogeny, kind of forming into a gray homogeneous goo, that's also a part of this. And the next conceptual piece that James gives, or not the next, but the next one I'll throw out, is the idea of the digital swarm. And so, considered etymologically again, or just consider the word swarm, like that's bugs, that's a mass of things that are like each moving of their own kind of will that is not known to us, but that together compose like this inhuman mass of tiny things moving around that we can't control and that kind of swarm about us, right? The digital swarm, not alive but animated, not organized, not comprehensible to us on really even an analogy to masses of animate creatures, but the closest we can get. Within the digital swarm, which is things like bots and algorithms, all of these invisible processes that weave together to make a virtual reality, a reality within our phones that we then inhabit, or within whatever virtual space, not just our phones, which are the common portal to it. Within the swarm, human organization, our all too human, real body, incarnate human organization, is subordinate to an always on machine algorithm that exists eternally and outside of space and time. In the past, and so this is the digital swarm. I think we're all vaguely familiar with this thing. We just don't really have a name for it. Digital swarm is a great term, great way to put to grasp, maybe I want to say the enemy, but also it's kind of an amoral thing, neither good nor bad. It just is. And it's a thing, the digital swarm, that the priestly class believes they can control. But James, the way he describes it, they really can't control it either. Nobody controls the digital swarm.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a dream to control it, a dream that the priestly class might harness the digital swarm to more fully complete their control of society. In the past, America kind of gained, hegemony over the world by controlling the consumer imagination, dreamcraft as statecraft, this idea of an American dream that the world then adopted, and we could kind of sell products to people and to ourselves to fulfill, to say you are a part of the dream as well, and create a global American consumer imagination. So now social engineers look at the digital swarm and they think we can wield this amoral, animate, non-human mass as another tool. Social engineers see this digital swarm, in fact, as like the perfect tool because it nudges. People think that they're free when they engage with the digital swarm, but it's entirely controlling and devouring us, right? Um, but the digital swarm cannot be fully controlled even by the people that purport to be its priests. It always is kind of operating on us in a way that is inherently beyond our control, just by the nature of it. Here's a sentence, a quote, I think that kind of outlines why. Poulos says, our tools formally shape us in a way unlike and incomparable to the instrumental way we shape them, which is to say, we make our tools with an intent for a purpose and hammer to hit a nail. But once we have the tool, it then is part of the environment that reshapes us in a way we didn't predict when we invented the tool. The same thing with the
Yeah.
digital swarm. We invent what we think is a tool, all of these algorithms that are intentional for a purpose, but then all together as a digital swarm, they then reshape us in a way we did not predict and cannot control. And indeed, for the ruling faction, the problem with the digital swarm for them is not that it dehumanizes us, is not that it ends storytelling among families or causes everybody to be kind of bent down hypnotically over their phones. It's just that they don't control that hypnotism, right? The social
Mhm.
media digital swarm is exactly what allowed unauthorized opinions, what the elites call misinformation, to escape into reality, right? And humans, um, we kind of impose a limitation on that in a sense, because the machines can always operate perfectly autonomously, independently, but they're tied down to us. For this reason, the ruling faction, the social engineers, want to get rid of the humanity in humans in order to better control the tool, in order to better control the humans, something like that. Does that make sense as far as the digital swarm and how the priestly class desires to control it, and yet they cannot perfectly control it?
Yeah. So the introduction, I think we've talked about this previously, but the introduction of the feed instead of the timeline to social media
Yeah.
occurred around like 2012 or something like that. And this was this realization that um, the the valuable metric to go after if you're running a social media platform is engagement, because engagement is attention, and attention is time, and time
Right.
is the old, like, time as we know is now becoming very apparent to those of us who are watching it pass by. Time is the only thing that you don't get more of other than Bitcoin, which is not
Yeah.
something that you're not born with Bitcoin, but you're born with time. And so it's the thing that you're given that you can't get more of. Bitcoin is something you have to go out and trade. You have to trade your time for it. Um, this this algorithm obviously got out of control, right? So 100 years, I heard this stat the other day, and it's shocking. I hope it's not true, but I've heard it in two different places now, so I assume it's getting fairly close to being true. Is that like 100 years ago, attention span averaged like an hour, and now it's 43 seconds.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so, we've seen this, and it continues to go in that direction because um, that's valuable. So
Yes.
that's the metric that you're optimizing for when you run one of these companies, and it's out of your control, because if you choose not to do that, then you become irrelevant and you no longer exist. And so it started with just a story, and then it became these like vines, right? Vine was really the thing that kind of
Oh,
clicked it
right.
off, or this six
Yeah.
second clip. And now that's like the standard, like 6 seconds, is where we're going. And so what do we do? Like, how can we fight that? And thankfully we have the answer, we have the solution. And that was, for you and I, we were introduced to this by Jason Lowry, which is pay factor authentication. And that pay factor authentication simply means that I have my social media feed. It's my Instagram or my X or my TikTok, etc. But I also have a little slider, and that little slider says, you can't show me anything unless you send me X amount of sats. And therefore, if you want to target me, so like there's the people that I will choose. I will
Right.
choose. I will say, I want to follow Grant. Show me everything that Grant says. I want to follow Donnie. Show me everything that Donnie says. But if you're outside of that, these ubiquitous, the For You page, if you're outside of that, once you move into that realm, you're subject to whatever the algorithm is trying to drive towards you. And
Right.
of course, the phone is listening to you, so it gets all your keywords and everything that you're excited about. Somebody says Trump, and now you hear all this Trump stuff. Somebody says Cyborg, and now I'm sure I'm going to see a bunch of Terminator stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, but with my pay factor authentication, I've got my little slider, and my little slider says that you can't show me anything unless you send me 5 cents worth of
Yeah.
Bitcoin. And now they have to really think about it. Now they have to really say, well, is it worth us expending this? And this, Jason Lowry kind of talked about this a lot, which is that it's costless, effectively, to spam a billion people a trillion times with just a 6-second clip. But if you impose even the smallest cost on that, and this, this is Adam Back's work. Like, this is all he was trying to
Yes.
do
Hmm.
with proof of work. All he was trying to do was not have spam. He was trying to not get all of these, which is funny because he's, he comes out of that kind of realm of like hackers and stuff. He's not that, but, that was the thing, is that you found out, if you were a hacker, that you could hack this database and pull 400 million emails, and you could send 400 million spam emails for the cost of 3 cents of electricity.
Yeah.
And all you need is a 1 in every 10,000 person to click on that thing.
Hmm.
And I've read like some of the way that it was just affiliate programs that were existing that, hey, if you get a click, you get 5 cents. And if that click turns into a sale, you get $5. And so, if you do that, and you've got a big enough bulk, then you're making millions. And so, and you're doing it. The fundamental thing that's wrong about this, or that's degrading to society, is that you're just doing it ad nauseum. It's a shotgun approach. And what you end up with is, at the least, it's a whole bunch of people wasting time. And at the worst, it's a whole bunch of people spending money that they don't need to spend for things that they don't want.
Yeah.
And so with pay factor authentication, I think we're going to have a weapon against that. And that weapon is going to be that not only am I not subject to your algorithm, I'll still be subject to your algorithm, but there's a cost associated
Right.
with showing me that. And the other thing about that is, instead of $5 Temu crap or $11 Amazon crap, if I'm going to show you something and it's going to cost me 5 cents to show it to you,
Hmm.
well, wouldn't it be worthwhile for me to show you something valuable? And not only valuable, but wouldn't it be worthwhile for me to show you something valuable that you may want for the rest of your
Yes.
life?
Yeah.
And so we go from this mentality of, all I need is 1 in every 10,000 people to buy this piece of junk. It'll show up at their house. It'll be trashed. They'll use it for 3 minutes and it'll break and they'll throw it away, but they'll say, oh, it was $11. I don't care. And then they'll do it again and again and again and again, until the point that they have spent, the bulk of their life just buying shit and throwing it in the trash.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is, well, maybe I'm going to make the best product that I ever can, and they're going to be really pleased with it. And maybe now, if I show that to them and I prove that value to them, and they say, look, this is a knife, and this is the best knife that I've ever had, and I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. I'm going to give it to my son. He's going to give it to his son. Then what you get is the most valuable type of advertising, which is free advertising, right? Which
Hmm.
is word of mouth, which is a warm introduction to a new client that you didn't have to pay for,
Yeah.
because you made the best product.
Yeah.
Elon, we've brought this up. Elon is known to say that, like, if you look at a Tesla, um, I think I have a Tesla, and I think it has two Tesla badges on it, very small. And they're honestly, they're kind of easily confused with other cars, right? Like, oftentimes I see a Volkswagen and I'm like, oh, is that a Tesla? Oftentimes I see a Prius and I'm like, is that a Tesla? There's Toyotas that kind of look like Teslas. But he says, the best products in the world don't need a brand. They don't need
Yeah.
a badge. What they need is proof that they're the best product in the world. And so you
Yeah.
should be able to, instead of, have this giant marketing department thinking about all these schemes, you should have a giant research and development department working on innovations to make better products. And I think that's where we see this, like, hopefully this fundamental shift between this transitory throwaway economy, which has
Hmm.
transitory throwaway relationships, and a long-lasting embedded economy, where you develop a kinship, I guess, towards the products that really
Yeah.
serve you because they serve you more than
Yeah.
you paid for them. Oh,
Yeah,
that
and
I
I
guess
think you
that's
put
yeah,
your
that's what that
finger
makes
right.
me think of there.
No, I think and you're absolutely this is directly to the heart of the matter, proof of work and your description of pay factor authentication as one potential weapon or mode of resistance against the digital swarm itself, which depends on its swarming nature, the fact that it's so numerous, innumerate even, that you can't stop it otherwise. And I was just thinking as you're talking, we even had pre-digitally kind of informal notions of this when you would have traveling vacuum sellers go door to door. They would say,
Mhm.
for some amount of your time, if you sit through my presentation, I will give you a set of knives. And then they would come in and they would show off their product and know my product has to be good enough for the knives that I'm giving to each of these people to get their time. And that sort of pre-digital pay factor authentication bought them a discrete amount of attention span. And then they were able to demonstrate, hopefully, the superiority of their product. Everybody hopefully walked away satisfied with the encounter, either with the knives or with having the ability to sell to a customer. So I
Yeah.
got the knives that way. I did. Yeah.
Yeah, the way that you get a great customer for life is by providing great service. It's not,
Hmm.
like there's a lot of like products that they might not be the best product, but if you have the best service, and I think what happened is that as it as technology found its way into production, it made the production of products cheap enough that they could be throwaway, and
Hmm.
therefore exacerbated and it made it look like it was much more costly to service a product. So
Yeah.
I could I could make a product that lasts for 100 years, but I'm going to have to service it 15 times during that time. Or I could make a product that lasts 3 years and then you just throw it away and buy another one. And that became the dominant model. But you're you're speaking to like a great example of that, which is the Kirby door-to-door vacuum salesman. My mom has two Kirbys. She's 70 years old and she's had two Kirby vacuums for 50 years, and they service
Hmm.
them and they keep parts in stock, and when you buy these things, they have a lifetime warranty. Um, and that lifetime warranty, it doesn't mean that the product's never going to break. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It means that we're going to be here and we're going to service that. And you have not just made a purchase, you've entered into a relationship. Um, and we look across the landscape of the human experience now, and not only do we have fewer relationships, right? The average male has zero best friends. Um, the uh, um, the the younger generation is not dating nearly as much as any generation before.
Hmm.
They're not partying as much. They don't have as many friends, etc. But not only that, like what what brands do we have an affinity to? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
growing up on the farm, like
Yeah.
you grow up on a farm, and there was there's less of a divide between politics, Democrat and Republican, as there was between John Deere and Case
Yes.
and
Hmm.
Ford and Chevy, right? And um, you know, Pioneer Seed or whatever the other, whoever. Pioneers kind of dominated pretty hard, but like people had this like lifelong affinity with certain products, and um,
Yeah.
we don't see that anymore, right? So you just go from this to that to this to
Yeah.
that. Yeah, so we're stuck in the liminal state, right? Of being exposed to the worst of that throwaway economy, which comes with it the throwaway relationships, which also entails throwaway memories. Um,
Yes.
and I hope, and it feels like, and I am very hopeful that we're on the precipice of not only returning to lifelong relationships and affinities, but returning in a way that's even stronger than it was before.
Yeah. No, memory, we're going to talk about this a bit later on, is a huge theme of this book. Memory versus imagination versus reason, and how human memory is on the decline. And that's at the base of a lot of this. But the next thread I want to pull on and you immediately leaped on this when you began talking about pay factor authentication, that our time is a hard constraint for us. And it's a hard human biological constraint. We're mortal. We have a limited amount of time. And as we've talked about, through Dergigi's essay, Bitcoin is time. And also Brady Swinson's kind of more fulsome and humanistic exploration of that in his talk. um, our use of time is what makes us human, and the digital collapses time into an instant. Like, there is no time in digital space until Bitcoin says we're going to have a 10-minute approximate block. And so it brings time into digital space. Digital politics um, is constrained by space time because any politics is. This is kind of the next idea in Poulos' work here. So the priestly elite wants to use the digital swarm to control us, to do what Ardian Tola calls terraforming people, to remove the heterogeneity of humans, make us all the same, to make us controllable, to terraform us into one strip mall or global airport lounge of human experience, because then we're easily controllable all as one sort of unit or mass. Politics, though, in the past has been constrained by space-time, which is what the human world we inhabit has space and time, whereas digital space does not have space nor time. The digital occurs outside of that. Politics, though, as Paulus describes it, is about not that top-down control of the elite trying to make us into a certain thing, but it's about the human constitution of community through ways of life that already exist. Politics is conducted through space-time because it's about the way of life of the people who own space over time, take ownership of that space, do things with that and in that space, improve it, things like that over an amount of time, planning for the future with consideration of what has happened in the past. That is the Constitution. The Constitution is not a written document that causes a nation. Instead, the Constitution is that thing that results from the ways of life of a community inhabiting space and time, which again is a pre-digital thing. Digital space does not have space nor time, so it cannot have a politics in the same sense. This book, again, the subtitle, The Digital Politics of Spiritual War. So digital politics constrained by space and time. The terraformers, the elite factions that want to create this global airport lounge of experience, really, I think, want to remove space and time because they don't want a prairie, a mountain area, an island region, all with different cultures. Instead, smooth all of that out, create one digital real world space so that it approximates the digital, and therefore the digital can more cleanly approximate real space, and therefore they feed into each other more cleanly, and they can use their digital control to control the real world, again, by making the real world more like the digital. So instead of controlling fantasy through the digital, one of the modes of resistance is to insist in working through space-time, through space and time in the real world, which again, through Dergigi, Bitcoin is time, is what Bitcoin does, brings time into digital space, and in that way perhaps resist the terraformers who would remove space and time from reality in order to have digital models approximate reality one-to-one. Does that make sense as kind of a description of the politics of space-time?
I'm trying to understand exactly what this terraforming means. So, like
Yeah.
being
So
in Asia,
imagine,
being.
yes. Go
Well,
ahead.
okay, let me throw out what I think it is.
For
Being
sure.
in
Yeah.
Asia, you have there's a lot of people that are trying to make their real life, their physical life, closer and closer to Hello Kitty or anime
Yes.
or something like that, like physical approximation, the surroundings that they have, the way that they talk, the way that they interact, etc. So, is that what we're trying to do? Are we trying to Looney Tunes the world so that we run off the cliff and the legs keep spinning until we look down? Are we trying to, in this idea of like terraforming we are trying to approximate the digital in the physical. Is that kind of where we're talking about?
Yes, and that Hello Kitty thing is a really great example. So first though, terraforming as such, the word terra, earth, and then forming,
Yeah,
right? So terraforming,
yeah,
the notion is like you can terraform the earth, you can make the earth how you want it, just like bulldoze it, do things you want with it. Terraforming humanity then is kind of molding humanity to be what you want it to be. And in the context of this work in digital politics, the elite faction wants to terraform humanity so that it is easier to control. Because the way that they control through the digital swarm is you create a virtual model of something and then you manipulate that virtual model. And that's how these planners love models, right? Because the world
right.
is too tough to plan. Like if you're a central planner, the world, reality we inhabit is full of implicit spaces between nodes. It's not knowable perfectly. There's always a wrench in the gears. You can't control the world as it is. But the model that you make in your mind, and now the models we make in digital space are beautiful and perfect. So we can create these
Mhm.
digital models of a society and say, we can manipulate whatever variable we want, create a policy based on our virtual projection creation model of society, and then now reimpose that virtual model through law back onto real world reality and manipulate it through our model. The example you give is an interesting one because it's almost a way where the digital swarm escapes from the elite faction. They want to use this terraforming to control the populace, to do whatever, tax it, vaccinate it, do all the things that it seems like governments are tending to want to do, impose a central bank digital currency, all these types of terraforming to be able to make the masses into something that is easy to control and govern. But the things like the empire of cute, the kawaii or whatever, where in certain cultures they want to approximate this digital aesthetic of cuteness, it's a way that the digital swarm is operating outside of the elite faction and controlling people in a way that one might be benign towards the elite. They might be okay with people emulating cuteness that is a digital creation. But it's a way that the digital swarm tends to create a beautiful, perfect model of reality. And in the real world, in reality, we then adopt the kind of aesthetic, the trappings of the model that was created in digital space. Terraforming ourselves in a sense voluntarily in the way that we always do when one culture becomes dominant and people all want to be part of the American dream or be part of that kawaii cuteness sort of thing.
I
I don't know if that
think
answers your
that
question, but
well, I mean, it does answer the question, but the question that I would have in response to that is, do we think that's do we think that's happening? Because if I look at the landscape of social media
yeah.
and, just the digital world, um, I'm not so sure that I see convergence of
Hmm.
culture. What I seem to see is that now, because of this tool, and we're going to talk about here, I'm going to say that there's lots of benefits of community of it, because
Hmm.
now, because of this tool, there's, a million people over here who are, vegan deer hunters who love to play the flute.
Yeah.
And then over here, there's modern monetary theorists who also engage in furry activity.
Hmm.
And over here, then we've got, I'm a gay left-handed baseball catcher, like, and there's
Yeah.
4 million of them, right? And so what we've done is it feels to me like, instead of converging, it feels like we have ground into more fine detail, into a
Hmm.
more granular, and maybe
Yeah.
those things do end up converging. But
Yeah.
yeah, you can find your tribe online, no matter who that may be, and
Yeah.
how weird your interests are.
There's two parts of that. First, you're totally right that the digital swarm is kind of balkanizing culture, breaking it apart in ways that the elite did not want or foresee, especially in the form of misinformation, quote unquote conspiracies, political resistance. But the other sort, that purely aesthetic adoption of identity, the elites love that because identities, I think, once somebody adopts those, they're easy to control. And the digital swarm loves that because once you have pronouns in bio and have adopted an identity, you have terraformed yourself in a way into a consumer of identities, right? You're picking something unmoored from history and memory, biography, a digital creation that then can be manipulated. If you are a digital if some digital identity has become real for you, then as that digital identity changes in digital space, you change as well. So there's that feedback, that control that comes, again, maybe not from the elite factions, maybe from the digital swarm itself, which is changing us, and which are two separate things. The elites seek to control the digital swarm that is changing us, but their control of it has been imperfect, and this worries them. The priestly class does not have a handle over the digital swarm or over the other technologies that they create to control us, because again, the tools that you create serve a purpose. They change us, but then they change us in unpredictable ways. And then we interact again with those tools, further change them, and we change in further unpredictable ways, which is all horrible for the elite class, which wants an easily, tool to change a specific thing that then they can, have a preordained result. But when you acknowledge that reality is not like that, that you change one variable and then a million others interact to create a future state that you did not fully plan, that's a horrible situation for a central planner who says, no, if you adopt my policy, all my models say, if you do B, you will get to C, or something like that. But
Hmm.
just to answer your question, you're totally right that the digital swarm operates outside of the control of the priestly class, and some of the identities it creates are harmful to that priestly class. And this actually brings me kind of to the next point of the reading, in that the crisis is ontological, not epistemological, that we are now in. It's a crisis of being, of what we are, and not of knowing. So the ontological questions that are now upon us as a result of living after the digital catastrophe in the midst of digital swarms is, who are we when digital swarms rule? Digital swarms that are not controlled even by the priestly class that purports to speak for them. Other questions, if digital swarms disenchant God and America, these big meta narratives, do we then worship the swarm? What is the thing that is in control if the digital swarm seems to be in control? What is the creator then? Is it bearable to be human if our triumph means that we have the current state that we have? If it all led to this, what did it mean to even be human? What can transcend the digital swarm, these alien masters of our creation, right? So these are all the questions. The big questions are now ontological. Human forever. What does it mean to be human still and to maintain humanity in the face of this, and to, in fact, have the temerity, the courage, like whatever, to dare to be human in the face of people like Brian Johnson who are saying, do you want to die? Humans die. You sure you want to be human? Like, what does it mean to preserve humanity when humans are weak and biological and they fail and we age, we become disabled? The digital swarm
You,
promises. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was going to say you brought that up earlier, and I didn't interject, but I will now, because I I look at what Brian Johnson's doing, and I'm not certain if what he's doing is not the most human thing. I mean, humans live. That's what humans do.
And then they
And
die.
so, but they've just died because they
We're
didn't
human.
have a way not to die. We also we were killed by apes and tigers and woolly mammoth, whatever,
Hmm.
and we froze because of the elements, and we died of thirst. But now we don't do that because we created tools and
Yeah.
protocols, and we built things that allowed us not to. So I don't know if what Brian Johnson is doing is inhuman, or if it's the most human thing, which is to want to live. Um, the will to live. Like, so we described this with the Chinese thing, right? So the whatever, Tang Pang?
Tang Ping,
Ting
yeah.
Pong?
Okay, yeah,
Tang
Tang
Pang?
Ping. I mean, again, it would be just as
Tang Pang.
incomprehensible to a Chinese person because I don't know the phonetics. Is it Tong? Tong? I don't know what the
Yeah.
whatever, but
So the people that are engaging in that, what they're doing is, I don't think we would describe that as living. Um, if you're just,
oh,
lying
yeah, definitely.
prostate and
That's not a good response for
disengaging,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so, maybe the most human thing to do is to approach with courage the obstacles that are in front of you and keeping you from being able to live. And I don't know, like,
Uh-huh, yeah.
we lived through a period where the average age at death was 33 and now it's 70. Who's to say that it's unnatural to live to 70? Who's to say that it's unnatural to live to 150 or 300? Or we don't know. I mean, if you look in the
Yeah,
Bible, there's people that live to 700, 900. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. We don't know.
yeah.
Um,
But I think
so
to
what
say
what is that?
I
Yeah.
think to say who's to say though is the cop out. We are to say. And the line you're totally correct. It is fuzzy. Humans have been cyborgs ever since we invented the spear or something like that. We've always interacted
Mhm.
with our environment and made ourselves part of our environment or part of the tools that we use in a way that other animals have not. So there is something about being
Yeah.
human that is about changing reality to suit us through machines and technology. That is for sure. But there is still that question. I don't think we can totally dodge it by saying who's to say, because then who is to say will be people who have the courage and the means to say, and they will say, no, it's perfectly fine to have a chip in your brain. That's what it means to be human. It's perfectly fine to
Yeah.
inject the blood of your child into you, which is what Brian Johnson does. So, these things are perfectly natural. It's who's to say, I'm to say, and that's, one of the ideas in this is that America has always had this idea. James calls it the creed of the spark. This is jumping ahead a bit, but this notion, it's a Faustian notion of there are the people who dare to dream because they make a deal with the devil in a certain sense. And the deal is almost in that person's mind thought to be a deal with God because they're bringing themselves closer to God. But the thing is always, is it really a desire to become God? And what is the human then in that relation if we're trying to beat death? Um, I don't want to die, and that
Yeah.
sounds uncomfortable, all the things leading up to death, but it does seem like mortality, vulnerability, aging, these have been a part of the human story, and the amelioration of them may have consequences beyond our knowing, um, in relation to our humanity. I don't So that's not an answer to your question. I
Well,
think you raised the right question, who is to say and what is the answer?
I'm I mean, it depends on where you draw the line. If you're in the hospital and you need a blood transfusion to live another day, then nobody has a problem with your son giving you blood.
Some people do.
If
Some
you
people
need
have religious
if you need
compunctions against it.
Yeah, some. That's true. Like, there
Yeah.
are some, but I would say that the vast majority of people would have no problem with that because they
Yeah.
would say, "Oh, look, I need this in order to live another day, another week, another year." Um, if you're in the hospital and you need a kidney and turns out, like, who's the best match for that? It's going to be a family member. We celebrate the people that do that. We say, "Oh,
Mhm.
look, he gave him a kidney." Like,
Right.
what a selfless human virtuous act, right?
Yeah.
And then we make it into this semantic issue where it's like, "Oh, well, it's only okay to do that if you're on the verge of death."
Mhm.
But we're all on the verge of death. It just depends on what you define verge as.
Yeah.
In is it in 5 weeks, or is it in 5 years, or is it in 5 decades?
Yeah.
Um, and so that's where it gets fuzzy. Like, everybody,
Yes.
I don't think anybody has a problem with or I don't know, but a lot of people say there's no problem with putting a chip in somebody's brain if they can't hear and they can't see and
Right.
they're
Yeah.
quadriplegic. We can restore them to normal. That's
Yes.
fine.
Mhm.
But if we take someone normal and we do that, then now they're superhuman. Just like I have a cousin who was born with one kidney, and so when she was born, they put her on steroids, and so she was a pretty jacked 4-year-old.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Um, Nobody has a problem with that.
Yeah.
But if you took a regular 4-year-old and you put that kid on steroids, everybody would think that that was the most inhumane, god awful thing you could do. And
Yeah.
so it's just this, like, what's your baseline? And
Yeah.
basically that baseline is only as long as it's below what I'm at currently, I'm okay with it. As long as it all it does is raise you up to where I'm at, that's fine. But
Mhm.
if you're at my level and you want to be better than me, then now I think it's immoral. Kind of like um, the woke kind of thing is like, who do we hate? The rich. Well, who's the rich? Well, it's anybody who has more money than me.
Yeah.
And so you can have $100 million and still call out, you know, you can be Elizabeth Warren, who has hundreds of millions of dollars, and still call Elon Musk a greedy capitalist, right?
Yeah.
Just, it's all relative to the individual who is making that moral judgment. And so um,
Yeah.
that's where I want to kind of throw back, and I say to you, I think who's to say
Mhm.
is actually a way better, like that's a more holistic or a more thoughtful approach, because otherwise it's just everybody's individual. Like, who's to say that it's okay to have $100 million? Who's okay that it's not okay? Who's to say that it's okay to get a transfusion when you need it to live another day, or when you just want to live a better life? And so
Yeah.
I don't know. And I don't, I get stuck on this too, because I follow this Brian Johnson thing with some interest, because he was, he's one of the backing partners of the network school.
Right.
And, like the workout plans and the meals, that is found, or blueprint derived. And a lot of people, I never got to meet him, but a lot of people that met him, they're like, yeah, he's a really nice guy. Like, just a sweet person. I've got his book. You hear him on his Netflix special, and he just seems like the sweetest dude.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, yeah, but he's a vampire trying to live to 400, or
Yeah.
trying to never die.
Yeah.
Um, but then you look at, like, well, what's he doing? I mean, do you hook yourself up and suck all the microplastics out of your blood? That seems like a good idea, because that's not human. Like, that plastic is not human, and that shit came to us through this, profit motive
Yeah.
maximization of short-term profit. That is a direct result of having money that loses value over time. Because if you didn't have that, then the incentive is to play long-term games with long-term people, as opposed to selling
Yeah.
out for today. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't
No.
know. To me, it's a semantics question.
Yep. So I just first say Brian Johnson, I have no beef with him. He's kind of though a bête noir of like the Joe Allens, the people who are railing against transhumanism. And so kind
Uh-huh.
of he gets brought up a lot as just kind of an example. But again, I don't know enough about it. I don't even follow his project enough to know what he's doing except for as kind of a caricature, although I think he presents a caricature of himself kind of intentionally for social media. But
Intentionally,
in
yeah,
any
for sure.
yeah,
But
in
the
any case or go ahead.
transhumanism thing is like, well, I was just going to say, like, what's more transhuman? Is it more of a transhumanist approach to try to live for a long time, or is it more of a transhumanist approach to code everything, and to always have your cell phone attached to your, like, to me, that's
Yeah.
more of a cyborg than the guy
Yes, it
who's
is.
shocking his penis.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so I
so
don't know, like, shocking his, but
yeah.
that's just what a 13-year-old does when he's bored.
Right. And so the longevity that is promised by the digital swarm, quote unquote transhumanists, etc., as part of this ontological question, what does it mean to be human? Longevity is the lever that gets space for then other things like cloning or puberty blockers and gender changing, physical modifications, other sorts of things that people maybe would be less sanguine about, but not even to argue about those, just to say I think we're at exactly the right spot in this book right now, because these are ontological questions we're asking, and that's where James kind of wants us to be, to realize it's not an epistemological question of what we can know about the
Define those
future.
two terms. Break the
Yeah,
ontological and
ontological.
epistemol. Yeah, break them down
Yeah.
for us.
Ontological is about being. What does it mean to be a human being? Epistemological is what it is to know something, to know a scientific fact about what it is to be human, say. So if you look at it all as an epistemological question, it's all about accumulating scientific data about the situation, coming better to know what DNA is, how the chemical compounds interact.
Hmm.
If you look at it as an ontological question, you look at it as, um, is it changing the essential nature of what it means to be us? So again, the question of being versus knowing. And James wants us to focus on the ontological question. How do these technologies impact us ontologically? How do they impact our being, what we are, who we are, what we dream of becoming, how we love, how we procreate, how we recreate, what is meaningful to us? These are ontological questions about what it means to be a human being. And this is a very fuzzy area. Who is to say what's your baseline? It's up for grabs. And that brings us to the next part of the book. The digital catastrophe then is in 2007, a specific historic point in time. So after that, we get the first generation. We get the people who are those who are born into the digital catastrophe, who have no memory of a pre-digital existence, a digital existence without the iPhone. That's the first generation in Poulos' estimation. These are people who are going to have different, who are going to answer the question, who's to say, what's your baseline? And they're going to do it without the memory of a pre-digital existence. The founding generation of the digital age is going to be answering new questions. They're going to be different people with different experiences. They're going to devote their identities to different wagers concerning this ultimate question, because the ontological question, who we are, begets further. Once we respond to that, we begin to, how it determines how we live, what we love, who we love, and all these really important things. So we need to think about it. It's going to determine whether we have rebirth and renaissance, or we have some sort of dystopian future. So we have the first generation, the generation that's really going to answer these questions in a full-throated sense. Year zero, we also have this other concept I want to get on the table because it's going to help with this. So the first generation, the young kids, Zoomers, I think you'd say, no
Yep.
pre-digital memory. Year zero, we also have that. Poulos says this is 2021. Year zero. Year zero is a reference to 0 hour, the hour after the Nazi regime falls, and suddenly they have to erase all of the prior memories of, you know, a Germanic spirit tied to Nazism and the Holocaust, right? All these horrible things. They had to say, we need to go forward with a different memory and kind of get rid of a historical memory, redefine Nazism in a way that didn't entangle it with just being German, I guess. Something like that.
Mhm.
Year zero means the past must be destroyed. And so 2021, we have like a historical reset. We have a break with the continuities of the past. All of the rites of passage, like the homecomings, the prom dances, the in-person, flesh-to-flesh body, like incarnate encounters that were rites of passage for a generation, were suspended, right? People didn't
Yep.
do the things that in the past would have made boys into men, or at least marked some point in that transition. Instead, there's a rupture with the past, with this continuity. So the first generation not only does not have like a pre-digital memory, they also have this rupture from the past that has kind of cut them off from a sort of continuity of development in the way that at least we used to develop. So these are two things as far as like who's going to answer, who's to say what's your baseline. We now have a generation with a different sort of memory, a different sort of relation to history than we have, than you and I, born into world without the internet, without computers, seeing it kind of avalanche into the world, knowing a world before, knowing a world after, able to use the former to judge the latter. Um, but what is the first generation how are they going to answer that question? I
Yeah.
guess is germane. But I guess I'll pause there. Does that make sense? This idea of the first generation and then year zero as a further rupture that the first generation has with the past?
Yeah. What I was thinking about when you were talking was that, so if ontological is being and
Yes.
epistemological is knowing, then I would say that most people right now are having an epistemological experience. And as a result of that epistemological experience, they have lost their ontological experience.
Yes.
And their their ontological experience has become epistemological, which is to say that we know
Yeah.
more than we've ever known.
Yeah.
I
In a
I
sense. Yeah.
know all these ridiculous things, right? All
Uh-huh.
these um, because all of the information is available. Yet, as a result of all of the information being available, I'm doing less. I'm spending less time staring at a tree. I'm spending less time
Right.
building fence for 12 hours at a time. I'm spending less time simply being. And so my ontological experience is, I would say, yeah. So there's just a bandwidth of humanity, of the human experience, and it appears to be heavily tilted toward epistemological.
Yes.
Oh,
That's a great way to put it.
did you watch this? Yeah. Did you watch this Netflix
Yeah.
documentary? Did you see this podcast? Did you read this Substack
Yeah.
piece? As opposed to, I spent 3 hours trying to perfect skipping a rock across a pond, or now I've taken an 8 hour hike or something like that with nothing connecting me to the world. Yet
Hmm.
I find that whenever I do something like that, I feel more connected to the world. That when I leave behind all of the things that connect me, that I become more connected to nature and to a feeling of humanity
Yes.
around me. So yeah, so the epistemological is pervading at the cost of the ontological, I
Yeah,
guess.
that is beautifully put and directly on point. And I was just thinking, as you were describing it that way, part of the kind of subordination of the ontological to the epistemological, the subordination of being to knowing is
Mhm.
also the prevalence of communication now. Like social media wants us to communicate all of our experiences to others, to
Yeah,
formulate them into a soundbite, an articulable thing we can tell others about. But it may be that you can't tell others about how you were transformed on that 8-hour walk. It's not something that is a
yeah,
form of knowing, it's a form of being. You simply are a new person as a result of doing that. It's not, I can't just tell you, oh, here's what I experienced. Now you are also a new person. There is no communication that can be had or epistemological structure that can be used to help somebody know what you are now that you became something through doing.
yeah. You can share knowing, but you can't share
There
being.
we go. You put the pith, that's it.
Hmm.
So that ontological, not epistemological crises, that's where we find ourselves. We need more than arguments and explanations, Polis says. We need to save our souls. That's what it comes down to. And there are two possibilities for Americans subjugated to what he kind of describes as like the repurposed weaponry of digital communications. He has a lot of really good stuff in this book. Obviously, we're just going to zoom over. But he talks about how um, a lot of this digital technology is incubated in the manner of weaponry, and it's actually now just used on us. But in any case, two possibilities subjected for we who are subject to the digital swarm. We can kind of retire inward into entertainment and sloth and just be entertained by it, right? Be hypnotized, entranced. Or you can compete for market share and the provision of this entertainment. You can create your podcast. You can be a content creator, as we call I suppose ourselves, right? You can participate in the frenzy. So it's frenzy or sloth. Which one do you want as you are part of this circus? The alternative to this whole thing, though, to explanation and argument, to communication, to reason, to science, is memory and biography. Memory and biography do not explain. A story nourishes by what it implies, not by what it says. I love that you said at the beginning, the space between the notes is what makes the music. The storyteller at your family Christmas, the story is more than kind of the set pieces of the story. It's the narrative structure and its extension over time and its development that says something more full than any of the individual words that are used. So memory and biography are incredibly important, Polis says, and they are what is being lost and what must be preserved. We look back at what he's described. The first generation has no pre-digital memory. They had also year zero that snipped their biography so that it is different than our biographies, our being people who do have a pre-digital memory, pre-digital existence. COVID put an end to lots of rites of passage that were part of the American biography. So we need to now, Polis says, if you want to preserve, if you want to be in some sense human forever, we need to think about what is human memory and how do we perpetuate human biographies. It's not what the digital swarm promises is you don't need biography or memory. We will be your memories. We can perfectly preserve all of your
Mhm.
photographs and videos and all of your your biological data. The machine will hold all the memories. You don't have to remember anything. You don't need a biography. You don't need history. Just make a wish and we will fulfill the wish. Pure imagination in the form of pure will is what the digital swarm offers. And that's kind of where one of the dangers of the way we're going is imagination over memory. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about like the the story of the house is on fire and what do people go after is they go for the photo albums.
Yeah.
Um, but everyone now has 20,000 pictures on their phone and they never look at any of them.
Yeah.
Um, and they take the picture and they post the picture and they forget the thing. And like
Hmm.
I have pictures pop up, when they do the memory thing
Yeah.
on social media, I have pictures pop up and I'm like, I completely forgot about that. I had no idea.
Hmm.
It wasn't a part of my, it's not, yes, we've offloaded our memories and we've offloaded our biography, but as a result of that offloading, we don't have it anymore. I don't
Yes.
have that memory and I don't have that biography. And in order for me to tell you who I am, now I have to do digital forensics on myself in order to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
Um, as opposed to knowing, like, it's like you have to ask someone else, like, I hold on, I need to go access this information because I don't have it on hand. Um, and what what is a human other than the lived experience and the memories? And so if you've offloaded that, then are you still human?
Yeah.
And there, you're just just maybe that's yourself. You're just the soulless meat bag walking around in a trance.
Yeah.
Um,
Save our souls.
you
That's what we
know,
got to do. Yeah.
yeah.
It's that
So
that naked, man, that naked. We're trying to save our souls. And you don't have to have some sort of metaphysical explanation or belief in the soul as such. You just got to believe there is something more than meat there that's worth saving.
you've taken a hiatus from social, or well, from not social media entirely, but from X, and you seem to be happier. Would you say that this has contributed to your experience as a human?
Yes, definitely. When you back away from X after being enmeshed in it, it is exiting a trance and entering back into the implicit after living in the wholly explicit. I mean, what X offers is a constant slew of tweets that explain everything, observe on everything,
Yeah.
and try to make seemingly comprehensible the whole to you. But you realize when you step back into the real world, of course, and nothing was made, nothing was made whole. There is no explanation for how we live. There only is living. There only is being. So the ontology is much more important than the knowing about the ontology in a sense. And so I haven't had some huge spiritual epiphany, but it is a feeling of cleanliness and purity and internal fullness for sure. When you step away from
Yeah.
something like X for a period, it's a feeling of remembrance too, of remembering this is how I am, this is who I am, and I am not all of these voices that are not mine that constantly run through my feed, and I'm not actually talking with those people either. They're just occurring. And, that's not a human thing if we define human as the way that humans have lived throughout our evolutionary history. Um, it's
Yeah.
also, this is a point I think you really appreciate, Lucas. If we're saying that the digital swarm privileges imagination over memory, just make a wish and we can fulfill it. AI can create an image of whatever you want. It's almost like, we have this idea of memory as rote memorization, as not creative, and imagination as purely creative, as fantastic, right? And linked to all these beautiful things that we make. However, historically, the ancients took memory very seriously. They studied memorization techniques because they didn't have machines to do
Yep.
it for them. And they, in fact, linked memory, not imagination, to creativity. So creativity for the ancients was a result of having memorized a bunch of different things, taken in a bunch of different things, and not pure imagination unmoored from memory. So I guess, as a creative yourself, do you feel that that's the case? Is creativity linked to imagination in a sort of romantic sense, or is creativity linked to memory, to having lived and to storing those lived experiences and knowledge about the world?
Well, okay, that's a great question, and I think I would say it's the second because I think it's linked to memory because when I would write a song, what usually triggers me writing a song is I'm in a conversation with somebody and we're talking about something, and in order to frame what they're saying in a way that sounds fun to me or that explains it artistically, I'll I'll throw out a line. So I have this one song called Hotel Razor, and it was like I was trying to describe to somebody what it felt like to get broken up with. And I said, she cut me like a hotel razor. Like
Hmm.
you're at a hotel and if you forget your razor, you go down to the front desk or they bring it up to your room and they give you that one razor that's got two blades on it that is
Yeah.
absolutely guaranteed to cut you no
Yeah.
matter how careful you are with it. Right. Um, and, uh, And so then you're like, oh, well, that's a good line, but I wouldn't have had that line had I not had the memory of like the pain of being broken up with. And so um, I don't necessarily, I mean, yes, it probably takes the imagination to lay on that, but I still have the wild imagination, right? I
Hmm.
still have as you talked about, like I still have, the millions of voices running through my head and all these crazy scenarios that are popping up. But the problem is that they're all influenced by that
Yeah.
algorithm, and they're all
Right.
um, most of the time they're grotesque or they're like unpalatable, and,
Yeah.
and I don't like what's going through my head.
Yeah.
And so that encourages you to try and step away from it. Um, but it's just so hard, right? Because
Yeah.
when you take a step away from it, you immediately feel this sense of missing out. You immediately feel this sense of, oh, well, everything is moving so fast. And and we know that not only is it moving so fast, it's moving faster it's accelerating at an accelerating rate. And so it's not untrue. It is
Hmm.
absolutely the case that life is leaving you behind in some way.
Yeah.
But is it in a way? Is it leaving you behind in a good way?
Right.
I guess that's maybe the question that
Yeah.
is worth asking.
Yeah.
Is it actually good to be left behind here?
Yeah, because behind is kind of in a sense where we need to go, a return to memory and biography. And so to be left behind is
Yeah.
to be saved in a sense from sensory overload to a totally obliteration of any sort of thinking and instead offering you pure wishing. And what you were saying is totally true. The imagination that we have when we think we're imagining is actually the voices that we're hearing telling us what we should imagine. So if the digital swarm offers to fulfill any wish that we might have, it also tells us what we should wish, but in a secret sort of way. So it says you can have whatever your heart might desire, but it's already fed those desires into our heart. And so it knows exactly what we're going to wish for because the digital landscape is circumscribed and finite in a sense, in that it's like you can be a furry or not be a furry. Which do you wish? It's like, well, I don't wish anything in relation to that whole furry, non furry framework. My wishes are way different and they involve real world space time encounters that actually digital swarm, you have nothing to give as far as concern the actual desires of my heart when I'm left in peace.
Yeah. Yeah. It, I mean, it may just be that Thomas Sowell is correct and that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, and that the solution is that you trade off being constantly living in the epistemological, constantly living in the knowing, and
Yeah.
you trade that for the ontological. Because um, it does appear to be that despite what LeVar Burton told us on Reading Rainbow, the more you know,
Oh, nice.
um, as the rainbow went across. Um, Despite that, there is a point where knowing is not enough, where, like, there's knowledge and there's wisdom, right? And the knowledge is the epistemological and the wisdom is the ontological. The ontological being
Good
that
way.
you
Yeah.
take the
Right.
epistemological, you take the knowing and you put it into action.
Yeah.
You take, like, that's wisdom is knowledge in action.
Yeah.
Um, and so maybe the wisdom um, is to get off the train
Yeah.
in a certain way. And I don't know what that means, because I tell you what, man, I really like being able to walk into the house and say, hey, Google, turn the lights down, or, play Jason Isbell, or um, I really like being, cooking and say, hey, start a timer for 10 minutes. That's handy. I like that.
Mhm.
Um, and I went through a period actually where I almost exclusively, like, I did everything that I could not to type,
Mhm.
be it with my hands or my thumbs. And so um, I was voice noting. Like, if I sent you a text, it wasn't a text, it was a
Yeah.
voice note or a
Mhm.
voice recording, or it was voice to text. And if I wrote an email, I, pressed the transcribe button. Um, and what I found was that in doing so, I became such a fantastic conversationalist, and um, it really raised my ability to have a conversation because I was doing it all the time. I was doing it with myself, and it's just like
Yeah.
any other skill. The more you practice it, the better you get. And so, um, that would not have been possible without being on that technological train. But
Yeah.
um, you know,
Yeah.
maybe there's certain cars on that train that we can decouple, and we can let
Yes.
them just fall off, and we can stay on a couple of the
Yeah.
front ones.
And that's exactly the right direction to be thinking in, to think with James Poulos here, because he's not a return go live in a forest. I mean, if you wanna go live in a forest by yourself, in a mountain, in a hut, go do that, but he's not about that. He's more so, how do we accommodate the digital and yet stay human forever? You know, how do we have both, and what are the limits on the digital we need to put in order to stay human while using perhaps the digital to do that? Like, the way you were doing it, using technology to, um operate more humanely in the world by recording voice messages for someone so they hear the timbre of your voice so you can directly talk to them rather than them seeing kind of blue words in a text bubble. So you were using the digital, but trying to use it in a way that was human. Um, the next part of this, I noted that James Poulos is saying memory and biography, and biography, just to get that on the table, because that's a little bit different than memory as such. Like biography is a different thing. So the first generation that is digital first, they are going to be digital in some sense. And so they're going to do things like you were doing, Lucas, maybe record voice messages in lieu of typing as a sort of humane resistance to being digitized. But what they're going to need as well, Polis thinks, is biographies that help them know the world as, or know themselves as part of a world that is not wholly digital. So it needs our biographies in a sense. The first generation needs guidance about how to find value in digitized ruins. They're going to need stories, literal stories and narratives of humans who have lived. Digital memory doesn't suffice for that. It needs humans who are like your family member telling oral stories, imparting what a life lived has entailed, because those types of stories pull the implicit, return the implicit to an encounter. Here's a story, now you interpret it. You got to take this story and then see what it means in relation to your life. That person's lived life is not my life, yet there's something I can learn from it. There's things implicit in it that speak to me and what I need to do in my life. And so one of the things Polis kind of calls for is millennials need to get their stories out of, and anybody who had a pre-digital existence needs to have a narrative of what that life was like as it leads into the digital, to maybe try to integrate it and give guidance to the first generation who did not know that historic reality.
No, I, I agree. I tell you, like, it's been so long since I heard somebody tell a story.
Yeah.
Just tell a story. And he was telling a story about this kid that he was a instructor for in high school, and they knew that the kid was stealing candy from the candy machine, and he just pulled him aside and he said, "Look, I need you to tell me. I need you to show me how you're getting into this candy machine because nobody else can figure it out."
Yeah.
And so the kid shows him, it's like shows him, and then he goes into the shop and he builds something to keep the kid from being able to get into it, et cetera, et cetera. And it's so hilarious to hear somebody. It is such a treat to hear a good story.
Yeah.
Um, and it makes you feel you're not you're not gaining knowledge. You're not, you're not learning something about physics or economics
Right.
or politics or, anything like that. But what you are doing is just to be in a room with 15 other people who are all focused on one person who knows that they have the floor.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's a great experience, and that used to be the entirety, right, of every family gathering before 2007. It was sit around and play cards, and maybe the most distracted thing you might do is have a football game on and somebody's watching that, but you're still, engaged in it, talking about it. As opposed to, oh, you're watching the football game, but what you're doing is you're tracking your fantasy football
Hmm.
score
Yeah.
to, I don't really care who's winning, or I don't really care if anything good happens other than I need Austin Eckler to get 3 catches like
Yeah.
that, so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
To to
it's where I land.
yeah, and to pull this biography and memory then back into the discussion we were having before. So the regime then controlling elites, whatever, the people who want to terraform humanity, who want a top-down control over the whole situation, it's they are against biography and memory in this deep sense. There's really two sorts of priestly types that are jockeying for control in the cyborg theocracy. They are ethicists and engineers. The ethicists are the ones that want to use quote unquote reason to try to control the bots. They want to say the bots need to operate in this way, according to our model of the way the world should be. It's like woke AI, right? The ethicists want to constrain technology through norms that the bots have to obey. They want to create a dream the bots are going to use to control everybody, to make the virtual model they can then force upon the bots, who will then force upon us. That's the ethicists. The engineers are the Faustian folks, the folks who want to use their imagination to create whatever tech will give expression to our wishes. It's like maybe the Elon Musks or the Brian Johnsons. He's not an engineer, but the people who are creating the tech or pushing it forward from a pure engineering perspective are those people who want to just give expression to our wishes by creating the technology that can do that. So those are the ethicists and the engineers. And the ethicists, I mentioned there's a phrase, a meme, catechize the bots. You might see that floating around on certain corners of X. To catechize the bots means to instruct them in a foundational faith. It's like catechism. It's the knowledge of the faith. So to catechize the bots means we need to give bots religion, which is the religion of the controlling class, the religion of woke values, in one type of ethicist might say. And so the ethicists want to catechize the bots. The engineers want to create and make better bots. And so those are the two priestly classes in the cyborg theocracy who are kind of mediating our connection to technology. They're both of those, ethicists and engineers, reason and imagination, united against memory, against a way that things were, away from the memory of fathers to sons, from ascendance into maturity through rites of passage, through the conveying of biographies. The pure imagination. The ethicists and the engineers want us to be able to reimagine gender, to end misinformation, to reimagine maturity, reimagine manhood, reimagine all these things so that you can, as an act of pure will, choose your anything about yourself. The body is contingent and unnecessary. Only memory preserves the body as something necessary in the face of ethicists and engineers. That's kind of the picture that we get. I have a tweet here. There's a famous tweet from Matthew Iglesias that I thought this was relevant. I'll read it because it's funny. So Matthew Iglesias is kind of a left-leaning political commentator. He's got this famous tweet that's often retweeted from 2021 after Trump was deplatformed. And he says, it's kind of weird that deplatforming Trump just completely worked with no visible downside whatsoever. And then, of course, that's the cascade that leads to his reelection. And so that for me is just like the blindness of the ethicists who think that they can control the future and think that all of their actions in trying to ban misinformation will have no consequence. Whereas people with memory know that you can't just fiddle with a parameter and expect nothing else to happen. The future is not based on your virtual model of the future. The future is based on this real world where things happen, where actions have consequences, right? And banning an influential political figure is not a wise move. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I've seen that before. I didn't realize who that guy was, but boy,
but ethicists and engineers, I don't know if go ahead.
I mean, what did happen as a result of that?
That's right, exactly the opposite. Yeah.
Elon Musk never would have bought X.
Yeah.
Donald Trump never would have started Truth Social, which I don't know what it's worth, but it's worth a lot of money. It's very doubtful he ever would have gotten reelected.
Yeah.
So gosh, yeah. Who knows? You end
just
up,
that's just the blindness.
Everybody loads the gun with the biggest bullet, and then they end up shooting.
But it's also that's just
foot.
the inherent blindness of our ethicists who are terraformers, who want to change reality from a top-down perspective, because reality is always more abundant than any virtual model we can create of reality, and it's always going to have some unintended consequence. I think Sowell talks about that. All the Austrian economists, any economist worth their salt, talks about all of the unintended, unknowable consequences that will happen from any beautiful socialist scheme or other economic scheme you try to force onto the world.
Yeah. You just never. I mean, there's no way to predict everything. I'm sure maybe there is. Maybe there's some computer model now that can predict every single blah blah blah. But you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know when the cow's going to kick over the lantern
Yeah,
and burn Chicago
right.
to the ground. You don't know when the you don't know when the two guys that you stuff into a nuclear missile silo for 3 days at a time that are junior employees that are meant to determine whether or not we launch, or making their own little romantic tryst, and all of a sudden somebody sits on the launch keys and away we go off to war. Yeah, like, who knows? Like, there's all kinds of stuff that happens.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So Lucas, I'd
yeah,
say we're about halfway.
that was my imagination at work.
Yeah, I'd say we're about halfway done based on my notes, or a little bit over. You got a flight this afternoon. Can we keep going, or do you need to wrap up for your flight?
I'm good.
You good?
I'm
Cool.
good.
So the
Yeah.
so it's just talking about biography, and Polos says that we need like memory and biography to rein in the ethicists and engineers who only have reason or use reason and imagination to try to create a future unconstrained by anything that has occurred, right? And so Pulis also in this book gives us his biography. He talks about his life, and I'm not. It's really well written. He's a great writer, and he's done so many things. He was a musician, he's a published novelist, he went to Georgetown, wrote a successful blog, and then moved laterally into kind of independent think tanks. He's done a ton of stuff. And in his biography, as he recounts it, like you remember the power of biography, the power of stories. You can feel an energy pulsing through it as you read it, because you're always weighing your own experience against his and saying, what does his life mean in relation to mine? Like, I didn't do that. Did I do something similar to that? What does that mean in the narrative arc of his life as opposed to my life? Does it say something about how I should live? And you kind of always are weighing these stories in that way. And he talks about how his father imparted kind of an awareness of power, the independence and authority of his father, the way that he acted. And Polos always felt he had, and he had verbal and artistic gifts that he needed to express. And so there was always that tension the artist feels between kind of selling out, getting that stable job, or trying to write the novel or do the thing. And he talks about it as like he had this X factor. He had this X factor about himself that he always felt he needed to give expression to. And then at one point he says that that X factor was his soul, right? That living his life was not just about making money or one thing like that, considered in isolation, but about a full utilization of everything that he is or was. And here's a paragraph I'll read. I think it says something interesting. Quote, the system I half-heartedly toiled within was designed to elevate soft, pliant, and effectively pastless people, especially young women, into the prestige drone tier that alone made middle-class sacrifices for upward mobility worth the suffering. It was a system not even focused on beating the life out of people like me. This system superintended a world in which people like me simply did not exist, despite the fact that by now the internet was beginning to announce itself as a place where anyone could find everyone just like them. So he's describing a reality where people don't have an X factor. There's nothing that you need to try to express. Instead, you need to try to fit yourself into the ways that exist for gaining prestige as defined by the elite faction, which is having the white collar job or something like that. But he always felt that, like, as he expresses it through his own biography, that his father gave him this idea that this was kind of unmanly, that it was the success of a people who didn't have a past and had no evident need of a future. They just kind of wanted to Netflix and chill or whatever, to be in the moment, get the Uber Eats, get get the things needed for a middle or upper middle class existence. And he kind of says, he feels bad looking down on people, and yet he knows still that you need to find a place. He needed to find a place where he could live the memory of the past in his own life, and kind of the biography as he understood it of his father's life and his father's life. He's Greek in his roots, and he talks about, how Greeks lived, and all of these things are relevant, he thinks, still to how he should live his life in the face of what society kind of tells us is important. And that's kind of the importance of biography. If you go far enough back in biographies, you see a kind of braided chain of fathers to sons, mothers to daughters, etc., of imparting a way to live. and we've had now a year zero, and so we need to be conscious about still imparting those biographies and still helping people to live full lives according to that kind of narrative structures, maybe.
Are there thing are there like specific things he talks about in terms of, just how he lives this life and you know, boundaries and things that he excludes and stuff like that?
That's a great question. So it's slightly there's two questions that kind of could be in there. One is like, what should we do to live after the digital apocalypse ourselves? And then the other question is, what does James Poulos do in his own life as he currently lives it? And when he talks about, I mean, he has a son, and he raises his son with a memory of the past. And he does talk about, he gives his own biography. He says it's important that we tell our stories, and he does tell his story. So that's he's doing what he says we should do. And he does say, my story is important because I have one leg pre-digital and one leg post-digital. And so I have an important story to tell. So I think that's one thing we can take from it practically that he does do in light of the digital apocalypse is tell of a world before the apocalypse, tell of when the apocalypse happened and what it means, and try to unite all of them so that people can live a human life as they go forward and remember the past so that they're not completely memoryless and subject only to their untethered desires that they then, use to make wishes from the digital bots. So telling stories, I think, is one thing, and having a son and passing on one's heritage, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it clicked out for it spazzed out, but yeah, we're talking about just like the things that made our fathers, having children, having a wife and a family, and putting your stake in the ground and saying this is where I'll be. Yeah, cool.
And also you telling your story too, Lucas, like that's what he's saying is important. Your father's story is
Right.
important for you, but then you considering your own life as a story and the narrative of your life and being able to impart that on the first generation who needs guidance. Kids nowadays need guidance, right? We all do. And the first
Yeah.
generation is going to do something important because there's been a rupture and they're going to be the baseline to answer those questions. They're going to be those who say where the line is between human and post-human and whether it's important or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I I get encouraged at times. There's times that you see young kids that are still engaging in the things that young kids do, and it does give you a lot of hope. And then of course there's other times when they've got their face stuck to an iPad,
Yeah.
um, and it just looks sad, generally speaking, I think, and especially from the parental perspective, where um, and again, we can tie this back to bad money. Like
Yes.
we debased the money so poorly in World War One. After the creation of the Fed in 1913, printed a shitload of money in order to come out on top in World War One, or at least be part of the winning side. Um, and what did that lead to? That led to this idea that we need to put women in the workforce, which I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but what I am saying is that there is a direct link to, if you have two parents and both parents have to work, then you have less time to take care of
Yeah.
children, and so then the standard today is a two parent, two job house, or it's a two job parenting situation, and so what do you do is you just stick a screen in front of a child because otherwise you've got to supervise them. And there is danger in the world, and we've developed these helicopter, especially since everybody has access to all the worst stories that have ever happened, with this is how this child died in this horrific way and this one. And so I'm going to keep my children from that. I'm not going to let them be exposed to harm. Um, when in fact, I mean, if you look at like Jonathan Haidt's work with the anxious
Hmm.
generation and the coddling of the American mind, um, it it may be the case, and it seems that there's some scientific evidence that it is the case that we are exposing them to even greater dangers by putting them in front of that screen.
Yeah.
Not just physical, but emotional, mental, spiritual, psychological.
Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah.
and it's fun having, when you see the next generation, so to speak, excuse me, and see them still participating in those traditions that have been carried on. Even the smallest thing, like watching a nephew's homecoming football game and then reflecting on the homecoming football game as like I think it's a uniquely American phenomena, like the idea of homecoming,
Hmm.
coming home. The Americans move around. We go to the city to get jobs. We, do things to make money, start your own family. But there's always the idea of the homecoming and the homecoming football game as kind of like a symbolic representation of that. No matter where you go in life, there will always be a homecoming. There will always be family to come back to in a community that calls you one of theirs. And to see kids participating in the homecoming football game is a really beautiful thing because you can always have this kind of cynical look at the situation that, oh, yeah, high school football, jocks versus nerds, something like that. But no, it's like the whole community is celebrating and uniting against another community, in a kind of
Hmm.
ritualized combat or whatever. But both the communities then also come together through that tension and opposition because they're participating in the same um greater tradition. And it's just fun to see and realize you're participating in an American tradition because as Americans we're a new nation and we maybe look down on our own traditions unnecessarily.
Yeah, yeah, and it it always has that little something extra, right? Where it's like, this is our holiday. This is our
Yeah.
community Christmas,
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, that homecoming is a very cool thing. Even now, like if I'm fortunate enough to go back to my hometown, and it's probably not near as big of a deal if you're in a big city or if you're a big inner city school. I suppose maybe it's not as big of a deal, but you know, if you're in a small town in the Midwest, then all the storefronts have artwork in them, and there's posters, and there's a parade, and then there's the pep rally. Like for us, the pep rally was on the steps of the courthouse, and the community would come out to support. And then there's the game, and there's the homecoming dance. There's just these layered traditions on top of that that make it. Um, you know, when I was at the network school, one of the things that we talked about was like, how do you build a community?
Hmm.
Like you can put all the infrastructure in place. You can have the gym, and you can have the meal plan, and you can have a nice place to live, and you can have access to all these amenities. But how do you build a community? And the model that we always turned to, that I always looked at, was like the um the collegial atmosphere of, like, um this is where we all come together in that homecoming way.
Yeah.
um homecoming's not as big of a deal in college as it is in high school, but it's still a big deal. And um it does appear like, in my college experience, it was like there was like a homecoming type event all the time. There was all of these big things that meant a lot to a large portion of the people. And there's always the Venn overlap of the people that are involved in these different activities
Yes.
that makes it feel as though like every week is a homecoming.
Yeah,
So,
and that Venn
yeah.
diagram overlap is what struck me about homecoming too, because it's not as our entertainment would have us believe that it is nerds versus jocks. It's, the band came out and did their thing. Different groups are
Yep.
recognized. You have the older people in the audience. They recognize maybe an old fan, or a past class or something like that. The past classes also come back and have their own reunions at that time.
Hmm.
Or maybe I guess that was at a different time. But in any case, there was this recognition that it wasn't just the football team. That was kind of the pointed expression of it, but it was the whole community, and what they represented when they have a singular identity centered on the upcoming generation, essentially, and the importance of the youth. And that's kind of what I think Polis is talking about, that we always need to be imparting the wisdom of tradition onto the next generation so that they carry the torch and do not simply throw the torch to the ground and light a new torch because they think they know how to do it, because they think knowing is more important than being, right? And so they need to
Mhm.
respect for elders, wisdom, like old fashioned stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yep.
So the,
Yep. All right. What's next?
yeah. So this, I'll see if I can explain this so that makes sense. This is a Human Forever is a very interesting book, and I'm trying to hit some of the highlights and trying to weave it together in a way. I don't know that I'm succeeding, and to the extent that it doesn't make sense, that's my failing, not Polis's. I definitely invite everybody to read this book. It's very well written. But in one part, he talks about the importance of memory and biography. We need to have these things because if we don't have memory of our traditions, biographies that show how those traditions operate in human lives, um, if we don't have the religion that is part of those traditions, new religions are going to always arise because that's how humans think. That's how we interact with the world. So there is a digital mystique that is arising. So we have, of course, traditional religions like Christianity, etc. But we also have a digital mystique. And he traces this digital mystique back to um, like the nation electrifying, electrification, electricity. So imagine, when we begin to explore and utilize that technology, we have these great gains technologically, but we also have a new way of looking at how the world operates on a fundamental level where, you know, light is something we can harness, and electricity, spooky action at a distance in a way that our ape minds are kind of not evolved to comprehend the cause and effect of picking up a stone, moving it, setting it down. Now we have electricity so we can flip on a switch and light comes on, things like that. So when we do that, mystiques arise, new ways of looking at the world. There's the rise, along with electrification, and the science that entails. There's also the rise of the occult and like new age ways of thinking. And one strand of that he traces out is this idea of consciousness as an analogy with electricity, that people begin to think of consciousness as this kind of universal structure, um, and that we can move towards the purity of consciousness away from the soiled and tainted matter of our human bodies to kind of realize a new birth, a new becoming. Um, it's in one sense, he talks about it as like a move away from the biographical, describe it in the terms of Christianity, a move away from the biographical incarnate Jesus, who is matter, a body, a real person, towards the abstract ethical principles that people kind of extract from Jesus. Love thy neighbor becomes the only important thing, and we forget the historic lived reality of a person named Jesus who maybe returned and died for our sins, something like that. And instead we have just these universal ideas that are part of this theme of homogenizing and universalizing, even terraforming, in the name of universal principles instead of historical lived realities. And I mentioned this before, but he sees kind of at the extreme end of it nowadays the development of what he calls the creed of the spark, or sparkism. It's a certain type of consciousness thinking that sees consciousness as infinite and wants to tie consciousness to science. So the spark, we're going to humans, we through our scientific technology and development and progress are going to, in some sense, unite a second Big Bang, a second coming, which will be man ourselves as infinite consciousness, using science to realize and expand that consciousness, moving away from incarnate historical Jesus, moving away from the body as such, moving away from matter towards the purity of consciousness, so that we can leave behind things like death and dying and disease and incapacity, and instead inhabit the purity of electricity, move like currents through circuits at the speed of
Mhm.
light, instead of having bodies that are bound in space and time. And so, yeah, and I do see that type of new age consciousness thinking is pretty prevalent even among people who purport to be scientists. You see that at base they're really motivated by this type of religious thinking about the expansion of consciousness.
Yeah. Well, if consciousness is outside the body or not contained within the body, or if it's this field of connection throughout the universe, then to experience consciousness is to be human, and therefore to continue to experience that consciousness outside of a body or without a body, maybe that's still human. So
Yeah.
maybe the transhumanists have a point. Maybe there is, maybe there is something to be said for expanding your consciousness beyond your body,
Yeah.
and prolonging that, or we don't even know if we're prolonging it, right? Like we don't know. No one can definitively tell you what happens when you die because
Yeah.
no one's done it and came back and talked to us except perhaps Jesus. And um, at the time, the press conference just wasn't asking the right questions
Yeah.
about consciousness.
Yeah.
They were more interested in other things.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think, I mean, do you
yeah.
find that the creed of the spark or the idea you've had a bunch of if this, then that. Do you believe consciousness is more expansive than the body and that consciousness is substrate neutral such that human biology is not necessary for human consciousness? We can have human consciousness without human biology, move forward into machinic existence, not worry about losing any sort of thing once we lose the human body.
I always think about like the first psychedelic experience I ever had was, I was like hanging out in a hammock, and I was in the courtyard of the college that I went to, and I remember looking around and I could see this radiant glow of light surrounding the building.
Mhm.
And I just knew, I don't know how I knew, but I knew that that radiant glow of light was the love of the architect that designed that building. And I looked at the tree, and there was this golden, or sorry, this green hue off of
Yeah.
that. And I knew that that was the life force of the tree. And I looked at my girlfriend at the time, and there was this glow around her. And I knew, though I don't know how I knew, that that was her love for me. And so, um, that is the experience that I point to in order to say that I do believe that consciousness is not contained within the body. Um, and then also um, to note that we don't know everything about the human body. We certainly
Yeah.
don't know, maybe even a tenth, but we've looked really hard, I feel like, for consciousness, and we haven't found it. And so maybe it just remains elusive, or maybe it just can't be found. And I think that would be a question that we would struggle to grasp, is that um, the idea of the ineffable, the idea of something that cannot be known to a people who have throughout. I think maybe this is something that you could think about, um, for humanity, is that we have trended more towards the epistemological throughout
Mhm.
our historical existence and less to the ontological, because there is such this great value in knowing. Um, but could it be the case that the most important, or the most the biggest the biggest thing of all to know is
Yeah.
unknowable, that it is
Yeah.
ineffable, that we can't know? So I don't know. I believe that, I believe, and I feel like I have some lived experience, that would tell me that, um, and I've had experiences that not on psychedelics, where you're just with a group of people, and you are all, to use the new age, explanation, you're all operating at the same
Yes.
frequency.
Yeah.
Um,
S
I've had that experience as well.
Yeah. So
In the yoga studio, that's a great example, by the way,
yep.
right? Because we would go do yoga, and there would be days where people are falling and people are shaking out, and then there would be days where there's like 19 people that are in perfect sync with each other, and it feels like everyone's breathing at the same
Mhm.
time, and it feels like everyone is connected to each
Yeah.
other.
So
So, yeah, I don't
when you
know.
tell me that though, when you describe the experience you had in that hammock of seeing the world interconnected in a new
Mhm,
sort of way, I see that as biological in the sense that this is Lucas having a true experience of the world, aided through plant biology interacting with human biology. But if you put that plant into a machine, it's not going to have that perception of that you had of the world. I don't see that as like
mhm,
consciousness being in the world. I see it as the beautiful way in which humans, once they can get rid of the idea of self, that narrowing mechanism of consciousness, they begin to see all as interconnected profoundly. And the consciousness, whatever we see in the world, these auras of love, is maybe a more direct, is a connection to the world as we should have it. And as we do think, I do think we tend to have more of it when we're not mediated by machines and when we are solely our biology in the world. I think our biology is a profoundly psychoactive structure, and that I think Neanderthals were like tripping balls when they were just walking through the forest and looking up at the
mhm,
stars, and like their experience of the world was that um, one where they were operating as a unit of people without the narrowing mechanism of self interfering. And that narrowing mechanism of self is really dialed into us by the digital swarm that gives us an identity and encourages the adoption of identities of being a trad or a furry or a socialist or an anarchist. It says these are who you are. You are not that silly body that you have. Whereas when you were on the psychedelic, you were that silly body in the world. And so I think that like the truly human thing is to have that psychedelic perception and to realize this is me being human. This is not something else. And so I
mhm.
think that like psychoactivity is biological and consciousness funnels through that or is in that in a very essential way, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the the common phrase from anyone who has experienced psychedelics, be it, ibogaine or ayahuasca or magic mushrooms, is that whatever they experienced was realer than real.
Hmm.
Um, and you come back with this, you have this feeling that whatever I just went through was the most real thing that I have ever experienced. And
Yes.
um, so you're right. So that this is like to be truly human. Um, maybe it could be maybe it is the most human
We
thing.
we live
Yeah.
lives of startling falsity because we are cyborgs. And the more cyborg we become, the more false things become. And I think those psychedelics make us naked again, or things that make us conscious,
Hmm.
make us experience conscious, make us naked. They strip our tools from us and return us to our biology. It is our brains operating on a different level as purely our brains, you know? We're not thinking about job or all of the circus that's happening online and all of the false prestige that it confers and stuff like that. We're just being human in the world, which we're purely ontological in that moment, I think.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. That's the most. It's the most ontological. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is the most being that you can be. Yeah.
And so this kind of brings us towards the end here. We're going to move towards Bitcoin at the very last point. Before we get to that, though, how do we stay human forever then? And I don't think Polis gives us a neat answer to that. He maybe talks about tools, memory, and biography, and the things intertwined with those like religion. But we need to be
Mhm.
conscious that the digital age is reforming the life and consciousness of people. That consciousness of the question is prerequisite to answering the question. You need to realize you are in ontological crisis that has no epistemological solution before you are able to answer the question in the correct way. It's not, it's about also I think staying human forever is about preserving space time, which is the human experience of reality. Again, the digital collapses space and time into like zero or infinity, right? Whereas humans
Mhm.
throughout our history and still currently are bound in space and time in a way that the digital swarm is not. It is our particular mode of existence that, in a sort of interesting way, the God had to become man, you might say, before he could truly experience space and time. Our mortality conveys upon us through our lived experience, our ontology, a sort of wisdom that we otherwise do not have. So space and time, operating in space and time, will help us recover our essential humanity and preserve it. To be finite is to be created, and to be human then is to return us, I think, back to like an appreciation of our created essence as finite things, not infinite, not digital, not living forever,
Mhm.
but living a narrative. Like a story is only a story if it has an end, I guess. And human
Yeah.
memory is human memory to the extent that it's on a human substrate, which is different than the digital substrate because it does end at some point. So resist cyborg ethics is what I think Polis is saying, where the human drops out entirely, um, where we simply manage databases instead of innovate through new experience. We simply innovate upon the archive instead of adding to the archive. The database model is digital memory, machine memory, as opposed to the human model of memory, which is living experience. Um, and cyborg ethics advocates the erasure of human memory because it's uncontrollable and and tied to a dying and mortal substrate. Um, yeah, if we allow posthumanists, I think Polis is saying, to leverage our fear of nature against us, our fear of death, frailty, even birth, the messiness of birth, all these things. If we let posthumanists say, "You sure you want to die? You sure you want this, that?" Then we're going to fall into an endless cycle of vaccines and boosters and other forms of biotechnological governance. So that's maybe
Mhm.
one inadequate summation of how we can stay human forever through space time, through preservation of human memory, through resisting cyborg ethics of ending human nature.
How do we resist, to quote Jason Lowry, technology does not negotiate.
Yeah.
So how do you resist?
Yeah. The digital swarm will always be there. It's something we created and it's a tool that's been unleashed. And so it's going to be living in light of that. Resistance is not going to be a final overcoming, but a conscious choice to live in a certain way that is motivated by memory and biography and Bitcoin, as we'll talk about just
Mhm.
in the next. That's the next thing I have. But before we get there, if you have anything on that, I mean, that's staying human forever means
No.
human memory,
Yeah, no,
human
lay it on
biography.
me. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
to be human is to define a set of principles that come from a lived experience. And though the author is encouraging us to stay true to those principles in the face of
yeah,
a changing landscape,
yeah.
right?
Yes, and one part of that changing technological landscape are those more humane technologies, and so perhaps we can count Bitcoin as one of those. Brady Swinson did in his talk that we discussed. Um,
Uh-huh.
so as I was reading this, I was talking with you, and we were reading this to talk about it on our podcast called Bitcoin Study Sessions, and I was at page like 251 and hadn't heard the word Bitcoin mentioned once yet, and I was like, "Are we studying
Mhm.
Bitcoin or are we studying human life? What are we doing here?" Um, but he does get
Yeah.
to Bitcoin at the end, so it's kind of funny how this is a book of really abstract thinking, but fleshed out with good anecdote and example, but also very philosophical. And so when here's how he brings up Bitcoin. It's really interesting. So he's kind of talking about we generate our notion of the self. This is my interpretation. Again, if a James Poulos is listening or someone like that, maybe I'm mistaking this, but we generate our notion of of ourself in distinction to others that we encounter. We depend on knowing others in order to know truly who we are. but technology is eroding that distinction between self and other. It's trying to say you can universalize yourself as a universal human consciousness, right? You can become electricity and you can
Mhm.
become digital and not be bound and finite. And so what that's really doing is eradicating the other, but then also eradicating and annihilating the self. And here's how Bitcoin is first enigmatically brought up. I'll just read the quote. The most powerful question that generates both the self and the other today, says Tola, he's quoting Ardian Tola, is what is
Uh-huh.
a Bitcoin data center? And it's a really enigmatic way to bring it up. Like a Bitcoin data center, what does that have to do with preserving self and other in the face of its annihilation through the digital swarm, making us all abstract and universal? I'll read another quote because I'm still trying myself to unpack this, and maybe you can help think this through. Well structured and understood, Bitcoin built data centers are simply the active archives of culture created and valued, thrown together by particular communities. So that's the quote. And the meme that people use, they talk about excuse me, Bitcoin monasteries. That's another meme you'll see floating around. People will say Bitcoin monasteries are needed. Bitcoin monasteries will return us to silence. And so here we have an idea that Bitcoin is a type of data center that will preserve culture and value, that will serve as a sort of monastery in digital time. That also, he kind of mentions Bitcoin data centers will be a weapon against the world becoming a single world computer, that it will help preserve human life in the digital age, uniting us under a new symbol of digital humility. Um, So as I describe this in this way, is this making sense in the context of Bitcoin as making us human forever, as preserving our humanity in the face of the digital swarm?
It is unchanging in relevant ways. And so it is a constant. And I think kind of the theme of what we've been talking about here is that we are losing what we understand to be human because the landscape continually changes underneath our feet. And um, Bitcoin introduces a constant that offers the opportunity for other things to be more constant. So constant money, um, that's unchanging. We, as a result of that, like we talked about with pay factor authentication, is that we may have more constant relationships with the economy, and we may have deeper relationships. So, yeah, I think it makes sense as like being. It's like technology has been the winds of change that are blowing us about here, there, and hitherto, and Bitcoin perhaps represents an anchor
Hmm.
that we can drop, that we can then, um, it's an anchor in a cove,
Yeah,
where we can then build from.
yeah. And I like that the cove analogy. It's kind of preserving us from like these winds that buffet us about that come from unknown sources and directions. So Bitcoin, open source technology, anybody can verify it. It's not like the digital swarm, these swarming insect bots that are operated by algorithms we do not know and cannot know, and who's even their creators, even like an AI, no one merely kind of knows exactly how it works, I would say, and it generates results that no one can predict. And Bitcoin is different, right? It's built to operate in recognition of human space time, to have a notion of time again, the 10-minute processing of blocks of transactions, to incorporate space by incorporating real world energy usage, um, and Yeah, it does seem more humane and more subordinate to humanity than the digital swarm in which we are in some sense subordinate to. As a Bitcoin monastery, that's a very suggestive phrase. It always has been for me. That's one of the reasons I read this book is I see that phrase tossed about and something strikes me about that. I just think monastic life has something to teach us, a life of silence in the face of so much noise, a life of, contemplation and meditation, and connecting Bitcoin to that is profound, I think. Um, and I think it does say something that, I can't fully articulate, but it seems true.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's where I have to leave it too, because just like we know that we can't centrally plan
Yeah.
everything because there's things that we don't understand that are going to pop up. We also can't um, just throw Bitcoin into the world and say that we know what's going to
Yes, yeah.
happen, because there are. I mean, not only is it this new thing, it's a new thing in a way that it is unique, right? There's never been anything that was digitally scarce. So what does digital scarcity mean?
Yeah.
What does sovereignty mean when it comes to money? We've never really had that. Um, yeah. So who knows where we go? Although I think it's just, yeah, it's hard for me to understand. It's hard for me to see negatives. Like I look for negatives, but you know, um, there's always the, oh, well, criminals use it. But it's not really. Like, criminals would much rather use cash than Bitcoin. Like, it's way more suited for that purpose. Um, granted, there's other like cryptos that could be switched out. And then there's like the quantum thing. Quantum, I thought about that. It's like, well, if you invent a computer that's more powerful than every other computer in the world, then um, you probably didn't do that without the type of deep funding that's going to be provided by
Yeah.
Bitcoin, to be able to have the type of wealth to create that. And B, what would be, so let's assume that that's the case. I think it's probably fair to say that there's going to be some, at least part of it. What would be the most useful purpose of that? Would it be to then hack the Bitcoin blockchain, which would immediately render it
Yeah.
valueless, right? It would immediately, like, that's the interesting thing about, like, if you were able to hack Bitcoin, all you would succeed in doing is making it worth nothing. You wouldn't be able to go and steal all the wealth. What you would do is you would break it, and then everyone would no longer use it. And so it would be worth nothing. And you would have spent billions, trillions of dollars, whatever, in order to make something that was worth trillions of dollars worth nothing. Maybe the best use case is that you mine Bitcoin with it. That makes a lot more sense. So I don't know. Yeah, I struggle to find the negatives. And so it maybe is encouraging to think about that there are unforeseen positives,
Yeah.
because we typically struggle under the unforeseen negative
Yeah.
consequences. But I think there's going to be unforeseen
Very,
positives.
very good. So the final piece, this book, Human Forever, was published on Canonic.xyz. Canonic, a creation of Ardian Tola, an Albanian entrepreneur working in Bitcoin. Just looking at the FAQ, just if you're wondering what does it mean to publish on Bitcoin, on the FAQ for Canonic, it says, why publish with Canonic? Content published with Canonic is directly stored on BTC ordinals and on the Bitcoin SV chain. This allows you to reach your audience with a global and stable censorship-resistant proof-of-work network, earn income with Bitcoin, and build on top of an interoperable and decentralized layer. In the age where AI algorithms have the power to tamper with data at scale, Bitcoin allows you to cryptographically prove the existence of a piece of work at a particular moment in time. And then he says, why do we store on chain? So breaks these two apart. BTC chain ordinals. One, an image of your work's cover, or what do we store on chain rather? So with the ordinals, it stores an image of your work's cover so you can prove authorship with your wallet keys, and two, the hash of your work so you can protect it from future tampering. The BSV chain, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, a hard fork, he says, this encrypts your work so you can prove authorship with your wallet keys. An on-chain unique identifier of your work, that is the Bitcoin standard book number, is given. The title, author, description, cover, and price of the book are on-chain. The paymail of the entity that published the work. Also, reviews from users who can prove on-chain their book purchase, and users' encrypted purchase receipts. So the BSV chain, we were talking about this before, of course, Bitcoin maxis kind of shiver at anything that's not canonical Bitcoin, the protocol. What the BSV chain, though, does, I guess, with bigger block space is allow a lot more data to be put on chain. So Canonic does use both BTC in the ordinals, but then puts the whole work onto the other chain so that, if the other chain continues to exist, you have the whole work up on chain. If that goes down, if only Bitcoin remains, you would still at least have the hash of the entire work, so that somebody, if they even modify one I to a T in the work, you could do the hashing to show that it's been modified or whatever. So you can at least have show that it hasn't been tampered with on the regular chain, but then also have the full work on the other chain, I think is how it's contemplated.
Well done, beyond me. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean, so the thing is that if you want to put something out, it's going to be in some database,
yeah,
and it would make sense for it to be in one that's decentralized as opposed to centralized. So
yeah,
it's great. I think it's really cool. It was like the first 500, I think, copies of Human Forever were like these beautiful, ornate, bound that went for a higher price, that helped to, kind of a collector's edition that helped to push not only the awareness of it, but also obviously bring costs down for other people. I think it's a great business model. It's kind of cool. Like this is what Elon did with Tesla, which is he built the Roadster first, which was the high price thing that's flashy, that is kind of a collector's thing that you might want if you're just a huge fan of him. And then he goes and builds all the other little cars that are just like the modern day Volkswagen Beetles or Bugs or whatever they are, Beetle. Canonic's cool, man.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm tired of walking into a bookstore and seeing the same 8 authors
yeah.
every time,
Absolutely. Alternative independent
Yeah.
publishing models. A book like Human Forever, you just wouldn't imagine seeing it just anywhere. The same with the other books, and also podcasts and other media on Canonic. It has an independent slant, independent in a good way. People thinking outside current thought matrices, one might say. Check all the works out there. Yeah, Lucas, I know you got to run for a flight. Thank you so much for discussing this. It's a complex work, but man, you were right. All of the questions and responses you had, they were directly in line with how Poulos was thinking. So that was a lot of fun to discuss.
I like him. I think he's great. Like I said, I enjoyed him on the podcast that I listened to, and look forward to the next one.
Right
Grant.
on.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas, man.